The wind in Goldridge had teeth in the winter of 1878. It was a high, lonely town in the New Mexico territory, built on red dust and the fevered hopes of men who clawed at the earth. The sun was a cold silver coin in the sky, offering light but no warmth. That wind, when it blew down from the northern mesas, carried the sharp smells of iron ore, pine resin, and the cured hides hanging outside the tannery. It was a town of harsh lines. The church, stark white and too large for its sparse congregation, sat on a low knoll overlooking the main street, its authority casting a long shadow. Directly opposite, facing the muddy expanse of the auction square, was the Copper Star Saloon. Its doors never quite closed, leaking the sounds of rough laughter and the sour smell of stale whiskey. Ella Whitlow walked the plank boardwalk, her steps measured. She was 25 years old and carried her first child 7 months deep in her belly. The weight of the child was a comfort, a solid, living promise. The weight of her grief was a different thing entirely, a cold stone that sat where her husband's warmth used to be. Jacob Whitlow had been an honest man, a miner who believed in a day's work for a day's pay, and he was dead. A mining accident. They called it a timber brace that snapped at just the wrong moment. Ella knew better. She knew Edgar Whitlow. Edgar was Jacob's half-brother, a man who shared none of Jacob's integrity. Edgar had a predator's smile and a grip on Goldridge that was tightening. He controlled the mine, which meant he controlled the payroll, which meant he controlled the town. He was trying to control her, too. Since Jacob's death, Edgar had been applying pressure, subtle as a boot heel on a snake's head. He spoke of assets and debts, of how a lone woman, especially one in her condition, could not possibly manage the small ranch Jacob had left her. He wanted her gone. He wanted it all. But Ella Whitlow was not made of soft material. She had a spine forged in prairie hardship and a quiet dignity that was its own kind of armor. She would protect the child inside her, this last piece of Jacob, and she would not be moved by a greedy man's threats. Her compassion ran as deep as her resolve, a trait that puzzled the hard people of Goldridge. She pulled her worn wool shawl tighter. Her gaze swept the town. Taking it all in, she saw Owen Miller, an old farmer with hands like knotted oak, stacking feed sacks outside the general store. He was a good man, one of the few Jacob had called a true friend. He caught her eye and gave a slow, worried nod. Ella returned it, a small acknowledgement of their shared, unspoken understanding of the town's currents. Further down, Edgar himself was holding court outside the assay office, his bulky frame wrapped in a fine wool coat that reeked of cigar smoke and new money. His henchmen, rough men from the mine, flanked him. Edgar's voice was a low boom that carried on the wind, full of false confidence. And then there was the Reverend Abel Armstrong. Ella could see him standing near the church steps, his black coat a slash against the white snow. Armstrong preached a God of vengeance, a God who saw sin in everything, especially in the native peoples who had been driven from this land. His sermons were full of fire and hatred, aimed squarely at the Comanche and the Apache, and his words gave men like Edgar a holy excuse for their cruelty. The town's law was Sheriff Durant. He was leaning against a post outside his office, a tall, quiet man who missed nothing. Durant was a hard man to read, but he was known to be fair, or at least as fair as a man could be in a town owned by someone else. His justice was firm, but his hands, as Ella knew, were often tied by the very laws he was sworn to uphold. This was her world, a web of power and greed, of false piety and quiet decency, and she was caught in it. The knot of tension in the town was pulled tighter today by a rumor, a whisper that had been growing for weeks. The rumor said that Jacob, just before his death, had found it. The eagle's heart, a legendary vein of gold, not the dusty gravel of the company mine, but a solid river of wealth somewhere north of town. Owen had spoken to her about it in a hushed voice just last week. Jacob was excited. Ella, Owen had said, his old eyes sad. He said he found something that would change everything. He said he was sending his journal, a map, to that lawyer in Santa Fe, a man named Simmons. He said he was making a proper will. Edgar, of course, denied everything. He laughed when asked about it, said Jacob was a dreamer. He declared that no will existed, that everything legally fell under the company's assets, which, of course, he managed. The journal and the lawyer in Santa Fe were phantoms, he claimed, but Ella had seen the look in Edgar's eyes. He was searching for something. The wind picked up, swirling red dust into the air, and it brought a new sound, the clank of iron and the low murmur of a crowd gathering at the auction square. Ella's stomach tightened. This was the reason for the town's grim energy today. The mining company's mercenaries had brought in captives, not cattle, not horses, but people. A Comanche warrior and his small son, captured after a brutal raid on a camp far to the south. They were to be sold today. A grotesque spectacle of indentured servitude that Reverend Armstrong had loudly endorsed from his pulpit as a Christian mercy, saving savage souls from their own heathen ways. Ella had seen them being brought in 3 days ago, paraded down the main street. The man was tall, though his shoulders were slumped with injury and exhaustion. He was perhaps 30 years old, his body a map of old scars and new wounds. But it was his eyes that had stopped her. They were like the winter sky, cold, clear, and vast, holding a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. He was bound, but he was not broken. His reflexes were still those of a warrior. When one of the guards had flicked a whip near his son, the man had moved. An impossible, fluid motion, placing his own body in the path of the lash. The leather cracked against his back, drawing blood, but he did not make a sound. He only looked at his child, a look of fierce, protective love that transcended any language. The boy was small, maybe 6 years old. He clung to his father's leg, his face buried in the torn buckskin. He had not made a sound. Not then, not since the trauma of the raid, the massacre that Owen had heard whispers about, had stolen his voice. The boy was mute with terror. Ella had watched from the window of the mercantile, her heart clenching. That look, the father's eyes, it had shaken her. It was the same look she felt when she pressed a hand to her own belly. The instinct to protect, to shield, to die for the life she carried. Now they were to be sold, like property. Nathan Red Elk. That was the name she had heard the guards use, a name spoken with mockery. He and his son, Tate, they were being held in a cattle pen by the auction block, waiting. Ella looked from the pen to the face of Edgar, who was now smiling, making his way toward the auction. She looked at Reverend Armstrong, who was adjusting his collar, preparing to lend the event his moral approval. She thought of Jacob, of his belief in doing right, no matter the cost. He had always said, "There is gold, Ella, and then there is wealth. They are not the same. You take only enough gold. You keep the land and the people sacred." A cold resolve settled over her, chilling her more than the wind. She knew what Edgar thought of her. She knew what Armstrong would say. They saw a weak, grieving widow, an easy obstacle to be pushed aside. They did not see the woman who had just remembered the small, heavy poke of gold coins Jacob had given her, his just-in-case fund, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in their small cabin. They did not see the woman who had seen a father's love in the face of an enemy. She felt the baby kick, a small, insistent reminder of life. She knew what she had to do. It was not a choice, but a fact. She had to do the right thing. Ella Whitlow turned her face from the wind and began to walk, her steps no longer measured but firm, heading directly for the auction square. The auction square was a pit of noise and kicked up dust. The red grit stung Ella's eyes and coated the back of her throat. A crowd of 50 or 60 men, mostly miners and ranch hands, had formed a rough circle, their faces a mix of grim curiosity and sour amusement. Reverend Abel Armstrong stood on the auction block, a makeshift wooden platform that usually held cattle for sale. He was not acting as the auctioneer, but as the moral justification. He was beating the drum, as the saloon men called it, using his booming voice to whip up the worst in them. "We gather not to punish, but to save," Armstrong declared, his arms spread wide. "We save these heathens from their own dark path. We offer them the virtue of hard work, the light of our civilized world, in exchange for their benighted souls." Ella pushed through the outer ring of men, ignoring their surprised grunts and sharp, appraising looks as they took in her swollen belly. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the thing at the center of the square. It was not a pen, it was a cage, a heavy iron box on wagon wheels, the kind used to transport dangerous animals. Inside, Nathan Red Elk stood. He was not standing tall. His injuries and the low ceiling of the cage forced him into a half-crouch. His back and arms were slick with fresh blood from a whip, the cut standing out dark and stark against his skin. He did not look at the crowd. His gaze was fixed on something beyond the town, beyond the horizon. His son, Tate, was pressed against his legs, the small boy's face hidden, his hands clutching his father's torn buckskin trousers so tightly his knuckles were white. The actual auctioneer, a nervous man named Fields, quickly read the proclamation from the mining company, declaring the two captives salvage from the raid, to be sold as indentured labor for a term of 10 years. "Let us start the bidding at $20, Fields called out, his voice thin after Armstrong's thunder. A voice, thick with smugness, cut through the silence. $20. For that I would not pay 20 cents. Edgar Whitlow stepped forward, positioning himself so the crowd had to look at him. He was smiling his predator's smile. He looked directly at Ella, his eyes dropping to her stomach with theatrical disdain. "Though perhaps," Edgar continued, his voice oily and loud, "our dear sister-in-law, Mrs. Whitlow, might be in the market. She seems to have a fondness for strays." A few men laughed, a nervous, ugly sound. "After all," Edgar said, taking a step closer to her, a woman in her delicate condition, with her judgment clearly clouded by grief. "One might say she is in need of a guardian herself. That poor fatherless child she carries certainly deserves a healthy, stable hand to guide it, someone to manage its inheritance." The threat was naked, brutal, and public. He was not just insulting her. He was laying the groundwork to have her declared unfit, to seize her child, to seize everything. Ella's hands, tucked into the folds of her shawl, were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. She felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded, but she planted her feet firmly in the dust. The entire square had gone silent, waiting. They were watching a second, more vicious auction take place, the auction of her reputation. She met Edgar's gaze. She did not speak. Instead, slowly, deliberately, she pulled her left hand from her shawl. The light caught the simple, worn gold band on her third finger. It was the last thing of value she had. It was Jacob's promise. With her other hand, she worked the ring over her swollen knuckle. It was difficult. For a moment, it stuck, and she had to twist it, her breath catching in her throat. The crowd watched, mesmerized by the small, intimate motion. Finally, the ring came free. Ella held it up, not high, but firmly, in the palm of her hand. Fields, the auctioneer, looked confused. "Ma'am, this is not a charity." "The ring," Ella said, her voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. "It is old gold. It is worth more than $20. Edgar's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had expected tears, a retreat. He had not expected this. "What is this?" Armstrong boomed from the platform, his face turning a mottled red. "A woman's sentiment has no place in a matter of law and commerce." "It is a bid," Ella said, louder this time, her voice gaining strength. She looked past Edgar, past Armstrong, To the auctioneer, my husband's ring, for them. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was not just a bid. It was a sacrifice. It was madness. "This is an outrage," Armstrong shrieked. "Is it a valid bid?" a voice called from the back. It was Owen Miller. "The woman is bidding property. Is it accepted?" Fields looked at Edgar, sweating. Edgar's face was a mask of fury. He had been outmaneuvered. His public shaming of her turned into a display of her strength. "She has no cash," Edgar spat. "The ring is worth $50, and you know it," Owen countered, stepping forward. "I will give her $50 for it right now. So, is the woman's bid $50? The crowd murmured. They had seen Edgar's cruelty, and now they were seeing Ella's desperation. The tide of their fickle sentiment was turning. $50, Fields yelped, eager to move this along. "Do I hear 60? The square was silent. No one would bid against Edgar, but no one would bid against the widow's wedding ring either. Inside the cage, Nathan Red Elk moved. He turned his head, just slightly, and his eyes, those cold winter sky eyes, met Ella's. He saw her. He saw the ring in her hand. The cost. His expression did not change, but it was an acknowledgement, a weighing. $50. Going once, Fields said, his voice trembling. Edgar was rigid. He knew he could not bid. To bid against her now would be to confirm his greed, to show his hand too clearly. He had overplayed. Going twice. Armstrong raised his hand. "This is a travesty. That woman is buying damnation. She is bringing the serpent into her home." Soldfield slammed his hand on the block. "To Mrs. Whitlow, for $50. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. Ella walked to Owen, her hand still outstretched. The old farmer took the ring from her palm, his own hand shaking. He looked at it for a long moment, his face etched with sorrow, then tucked it into his pocket. He pulled a small leather purse from his coat and counted 5 gold coins into her hand. Ella walked to the auctioneer's block and placed the coins on the wood. Then she turned to the 2 men guarding the cage. "Unlock it." For a moment, they hesitated, looking to Edgar. "Unlock it," Sheriff Durant said, his voice a low growl. He had been standing by his office, watching. He moved now, his hand not on his gun, but simply present. The men, cowed, fumbled with the key and swung the iron door open. Nathan Red Elk stepped out of the cage, straightening to his full height. He was taller than she had realized, though he favored his left leg. He reached back inside and, with a gentleness that was shocking after the brutality of the scene, lifted his son. Tate wrapped his arms around his father's neck, burying his face, still silent. Edgar Whitlow pushed his way through the crowd until he was inches from Ella. His face was pale with rage. "You are no longer a Whitlow," he hissed, his voice low and venomous so only she could hear. "You have shamed the name. You have shamed Jacob's memory. I will see you in court. I will see that child taken from you the moment it draws breath. You will be ruined." Ella looked at him, her own face pale but calm. She did not say a word. She simply turned her back on him. She looked at Nathan. "Please, follow me." She began to walk, away from the square, away from the center of town, toward the small cabin on the canyon's edge that Jacob had built for them. The journey was a new kind of spectacle. The town watched her go, a pregnant widow, her husband's wedding ring sold, walking away from her inheritance, followed by a bleeding Comanche warrior and his silent child. Nathan walked behind her, keeping a distance of 10 paces. He carried Tate in one arm. His head was up, his eyes constantly moving, scanning the rooftops, the alleys, the faces they passed. He was mapping the terrain, assessing the threat. He walked like a hunter, or the hunted, every step measured, his weight balanced, ready to react. The cabin was a mile from town, up a steep, rocky path. The wind was colder here, the air thinner. Ella's lungs began to burn, and the weight of the baby pulled at her back. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and the world grayed at the edges. Her knees buckled. She did not fall. He was there, suddenly. He had closed the 10 paces in an instant, his movement fluid and silent. His left arm, the one not holding his son, was around her, steadying her. His grip was not rough, but it was iron. It held her up. She leaned against him for a long moment, catching her breath, the smell of his skin, of sweat and blood and dust, sharp in her nostrils. She was leaning on a man she had just bought, a man her people called a savage. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling away slightly. He let her go, but his eyes stayed on her face. They were sharp, assessing. "Do not push," he said. His voice was a low rasp, gravelly from disuse. It was the first time she had heard him speak. He did not offer to help her again, but he shortened the distance between them as they climbed the rest of the way. When they reached the small cabin, a simple one-room structure of pine logs, the sun was beginning to set, staining the clouds a bruised purple. A cold rain was beginning to fall. Ella pushed open the door and stepped into the small, cold room. She turned. Nathan had stopped on the small porch, his son still clinging to him. He was looking out at the canyon, at the darkening sky, as if measuring his chances. "You are free," Ella said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. "I did not buy you. I paid for your freedom. You can go, or you can stay, as you choose." Nathan looked at her for a long time. He looked at the cabin, at the sparse furnishings she had brought from the ranch. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. Then he looked at his son, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He gently set Tate down on the porch, under the small overhang of the roof. The boy immediately pressed himself against his father's leg. Nathan Red Elk turned his back to her and walked to the small woodpile at the side of the cabin. He picked up the axe. He did not go to the mountains. He did not run. He began to build a fire, not in her hearth, but on the porch, under the shelter of the roof, positioning his body between the growing flames and his son, and between his son and the rain-swept darkness of the world outside. He had chosen to stay. The rain turned to sleet, a sharp, angry rattling against the cabin's roof. Ella had lit the single lantern, and it cast a pool of weak yellow light in the center of the one room, leaving the corners in deep shadow. She sat on her cot, the rough wool blanket pulled around her shoulders, listening to the two distinct sounds outside the rising storm and the steady, rhythmic chop of an axe. Nathan had not stopped. He had found Jacob's old, heavy axe, tested its weight and balance with one hand, and then set to work on the pile of logs Jacob had hauled down from the mesa before his death. He was working in the dark, in the freezing rain, as if driven by a quiet, focused rage. The fire he had built on the porch was small but hot, shielded from the worst of the wind by a low stone overhang. Tate was huddled near it, wrapped in a piece of canvas Nathan had found, the boy's small form silhouetted against the flames. Ella got up, her back aching. She opened the cabin door. The wind tore it from her grasp and slammed it against the outer wall. "Mr. Red Elk," she called out over the howl of the wind. He stopped, the axe held low in one hand. He was soaked, his black hair plastered to his face and neck. The blood from the whip cuts on his back had been washed away by the rain. "The fire will be out in an hour," she shouted. "There is a hearth inside. You and your son will be warmer. Please, come in." He looked at her, then at the open door, then at his son. He seemed to be weighing the invisible lines of her world, the rules of a white woman's cabin. He gave a single, curt nod. He picked up his son, who was asleep or pretending to be, and carried him inside. He did not go to the center of the room, but stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes sweeping the small space, clocking the single window, the cot, the empty fireplace. He set Tate down on the floor near the hearth, then went back outside. He returned with several armloads of the wood he had just split, stacking it neatly by the fireplace. He knelt, took the flint and steel from his own pouch, and with quick, economical movements, had a new fire blazing in moments. He settled his son near the growing warmth, then took up a position by the door, his back against the log wall. His knees drawn up, he was inside, but he was not at ease. He was a sentry. Ella did not know what to say. She poured water from her pitcher into the kettle and hung it over the new fire. She found a heel of bread and a piece of dried meat. She offered it to him. He looked at the food, then at her, and shook his head. She placed it on the floor near him anyway. For your son. When he wakes. She retreated to her cot. The cabin was filled with a new, heavy silence, broken only by the storm and the crackle of the fire. She watched him. He was not resting. He was listening, his head tilted slightly, his focus on the world outside her walls. Hours later, a heavy knock rattled the door, making them both jump. Nathan was on his feet in a single, silent motion, his hand grabbing a thick piece of firewood, his body tense. "Ella, it's me!" "Owen," a voice shouted from the storm. Ella sagged with relief. "It is all right," she said to Nathan, who did not lower the piece of wood. "He is a friend." She unbarred the door. Owen Miller stumbled in, his heavy coat covered in ice, his face red from the wind. He was carrying a sack. "Lord preserve us." "Child," he said, his eyes going from Ella to Nathan, then to the small boy by the fire. He stopped, his gaze lingering on the sleeping child. "I came as fast as I could. The whole town is buzzing like a nest of hornets." He dropped the sack on the table, brought you some flour and some coffee, and this, he pulled out a heavy quilt. "It is not much, but the wind is sharp." "Thank you, Owen," Ella said, her voice thick. "You should not have come out in this." "Nonsense. Had to warn you." He unbuttoned his coat, his face grim. "It is worse than I thought. Ella, that auction, you shamed Edgar, and you defied the Reverend. They are not letting it stand." Nathan had not moved from his spot by the wall, but Ella could feel his attention, sharp as a blade. "Armstrong is using his pulpit," Owen said, his voice dropping. "He is up there right now, holding a special prayer meeting. He is calling it a rescuing a fallen dove. He is telling them you have been taken by heathen darkness, that you are consorting with a savage." Ella's stomach turned to ice. Consorting. "It is a dirty word for a dirty lie," Owen said, his own anger showing. "But it is working. He is painting you as unfit, as unstable from grief. He and Edgar are putting together a petition. They are getting the company men, the good church folk, to sign it. They mean to have the court appoint a guardian for you." "A guardian," Ella whispered, her hand going to her belly. "For the child," Owen said, his voice breaking. "They are filing for guardianship of the baby, to be enacted the moment he is born. They say they will rescue the babe from a life of sin and savagery. They mean to take your child. Ella." The room seemed to tilt. Ella sank onto the small stool by the fire. Take her child, the baby, Jacob's baby. This was the true shape of Edgar's threat. "But he cannot," she said, her voice thin. "He has no right." "He is making a right," Owen said. "If he can prove you are unstable, and bringing a Comanche warrior into your home hours after your husband's brother warned you. Armstrong is calling it proof of your madness. They are making it seem like you are a danger to yourself and the child." "He wants the eagle's heart," Ella said, the words tasting like ash. "He thinks if he controls my child, he controls Jacob's share. He controls the mine." "That is the heart of it," Owen agreed. "But there is more. That lawyer in Santa Fe, Mr. Simmons. I sent him a wire this morning, before the auction. I told him Jacob was dead and that his brother was trying to seize the estate. He wired back just before the storm hit." Owen reached into his coat and pulled out a damp piece of paper. "He says Jacob's will is real. He has it, locked safe. And he says Jacob wrote a long letter with it, explaining his intentions." Ella looked up, a tiny flicker of hope. What intentions? Owen looked from her to Nathan, and his voice dropped even lower. Simmons did not say in the wire. But Jacob talked to me. Ella, he was not just finding gold. He was finding peace. He said the eagle's heart was on land the Comanche considered sacred. He said he was thinking of setting up a trust to give a share of the findings, maybe the land itself, back to the tribe, as a way to make things right. The cabin was utterly still. If Edgar got wind of that, Ella breathed. He would not just want the gold, Owen finished. He would want the will, and Jacob, and anyone who knew about it, gone. He would want to destroy the beneficiaries, all of them. Now it was clear. The raid, the captives. It was not just random cruelty. It was a cleansing. A sound, a low scrape, came from the wall. Nathan Red Elk stepped forward into the light. The firewood was still in his hand, but he was not looking at Owen as a threat. He was looking at Ella. His eyes were no longer cold. They were alive, burning with a new, complex understanding. He looked at her, at the proof of her pregnancy, at the fear in her eyes, and he understood the price she had paid. You gave your ring, he said, his voice a low rumble. The one from your husband. Ella nodded, unable to speak. You gave it for us. He said it was not a question. He stepped closer, and the heat from the fire illuminated the scars on his face, the weariness around his eyes. I will keep my word, he said. You are under my protection now. I will not let them take your child. It was a vow, spoken with the finality of a death sentence. The wind hammered the cabin, and a crack of thunder, loud as a cannon shot, shook the very ground. Tate, who had been in a restless sleep, bolt upright with a small, choked cry. He was trembling, his eyes wide with a terror that was deeper than the storm. Ella moved without thinking. She slid off the stool and knelt beside the boy, putting herself between him and the door, between him and the men. It is all right, she said, her voice soft. It is just the sky making noise. It cannot hurt us. Tate whimpered, pressing himself against the stone of the hearth, his small hands over his ears. Ella sat on the floor, pulling the quilt Owen had brought toward her. She did not touch the boy. She just sat near him. When I was a girl, she said, her voice calm and steady, I was afraid of the thunder. Too. My mother told me it was the sound of the sky buffalo, running across the clouds, but I liked my father's story better. Nathan and Owen were silent, watching. He told me about a rabbit, Ella said, her eyes on Tate. A small, gray rabbit, no bigger than you. And a big storm came, just like this. The wind howled and the thunder cracked, and the rabbit was so afraid. He ran to his burrow, but it was flooded. He ran to a big tree, but the lightning struck it. He was all alone, and he was shaking. Tate's hands had not moved, but his eyes, wide and dark, were fixed on her face. So the little rabbit, Ella continued. He stopped running. He sat very still on a rock, and he looked up at the sky, and he yelled, in his tiny rabbit voice, You cannot scare me, I am still here. And the storm. It was so surprised to hear a little rabbit be so brave. It just stopped, and the sun came out. She smiled, a small, sad smile. It is just a story, but it helped. Being brave is not about not being scared. It is about being scared, and standing still anyway. Tate slowly, very slowly, lowered his hands. He did not move toward her, but he did not pull away. He just watched her. From the shadows by the wall, Nathan's voice came, so low it was almost lost in the wind. Thank you, he said. Owen Miller cleared his throat, his eyes suspiciously bright. He put his hat back on. I have to go. Ella, they will wonder where I am. But you are not alone in this. Jacob had friends, real friends. We are just quiet. Owen, wait, she said. I have to go, he repeated. But I will tell you this. Sheriff Durant, he stopped me on my way here. He knows what Armstrong is up to. He cannot stop a petition. But he is not a fool." Owen opened the door, letting in a blast of icy air. "He told me to tell you something. He said, 'I am one man, and I keep the peace. But a piece of paper from a judge in Santa Fe can tie my hands. Tell her to be careful who she lets in her house. He is walking a fine line. Ella, but he is watching." The old man nodded to her, then to Nathan, and was gone, swallowed by the storm. Ella barred the door. The cabin, which had felt like a refuge, now felt like a trap. A legal paper trap was closing around her. She turned to Nathan. He was watching the fire, his face grim. The lines of the fight were clearly drawn. Edgar and Armstrong had the law, the church, and the town. She had a cabin on a windy cliff, the friendship of an old farmer, and a single, wounded warrior. "We cannot fight the town," she said. "The reality of it settling on her. We cannot fight the law." Nathan looked up. The firelight caught the planes of his face. "No," he said, "not their law, not in their town." He rose and went to the window, pushing aside the rough cloth that covered it. He peered out into the black, swirling snow. "We do not fight. We survive," he said. "The winter is here. We need food. We need water. We need to be gone from this place before they come with their paper." He let the cloth fall, plunging the window back into darkness. "We prepare for the winter," he said, his voice certain. "Then we deal with the law. That is the only way." Ella looked at him, then at Tate, who had curled up in the quilt, his eyes finally closed. Nathan was right. The legal battle was a distant war. The battle for survival was here, now, in this room, in this storm, and it was a battle she could not fight alone. The storm passed as if it had never been, leaving the world scoured and frozen. The sun rose thin and white, the same cold silver coin, and the high canyon air was so clear it hurt to breathe. Inside the cabin, a new life was taking shape, a quiet, domestic rhythm born of necessity. The first morning, Ella awoke to the sound of scraping. She sat up on her cot, her back stiff. Nathan was already awake, not by the door, but on the roof. He had taken one of her kitchen knives and was using it to cut away the sodden, rotten patch of roof that had leaked during the storm. He worked with a grim, focused energy. He seemed to draw strength not from food or rest, but from the work itself. He spent 3 days on that roof. He found a small pine, felled it with a heavy axe, and split the trunk into new shingles. He used Jacob's tools, his movements precise, as if he had built 100 such roofs. He patched the gaps with a mixture of mud and pine resin, and the cabin, which had always smelled of damp and wood smoke, now carried the sharp, clean scent of the forest. Ella watched him. He was still gaunt, his ribs visible beneath the torn buckskin, but the wounds on his back were beginning to heal. He moved with a purpose that was both comforting and unsettling. He was a warrior, and his new battlefield was this small, vulnerable cabin. He did not just fix the roof. He tightened the door frame, which the wind had warped. He carved a new, stronger wooden bar. He saw her struggling to haul 2 buckets of water from the half-frozen creek, her pregnancy making the simple task treacherous. She had nearly slipped, and the fear of falling, of harming the child, had made her stop and weep in frustration. She had said nothing to him, but he had seen. The next day, she found a yoke outside the door. He had carved it from a single, smooth piece of cured oak he had found in Jacob's woodpile. It was perfectly balanced, sanded smooth, and designed to distribute the weight across her shoulders, not her belly. She looked at him, her throat tight. He was stacking firewood, his back to her. "Thank you," she said. He did not turn, but he paused, the log held in his hands. He gave a single, small nod. The small, shared life went on. Ella cooked, stretching the flour Owen had brought, making thin broth from dried jerky. Nathan ate little, always giving the largest share to Tate, who, in turn, would not eat until his father did. At night, the new threshold was drawn. Ella had offered Nathan the quilt and the floor by the hearth, the warmest place in the cabin. He had refused. "I will stay by the door." It was not a request. He laid his bedroll, a thin, worn blanket, on the cold floor between her cot and the newly barred door. He slept there every night, a living shield. He was the barrier between the women and the child in the cabin, and the dangers of the world outside. And for the first time since the raid, Tate slept through the night. He had made a small nest by the hearth, wrapped in the heavy quilt Owen had brought. He was still silent. He did not speak. He did not laugh. He did not cry. He simply watched, his dark eyes following his father's every move, and, increasingly, following Ella. But his nights were no longer filled with the muffled, terrified sounds she had heard that first night. He slept deeply, a small boy, finally safe, if not yet whole. One evening, when the fire was burning low and Tate was asleep, Ella finally asked the question that sat between them. "Your son," she said, her voice soft, trying not to break the stillness. "He has not made a sound since I have seen him." Nathan was sharpening the kitchen knife on a whetstone, the shing, 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 a hypnotic, steady sound. He did not stop, but his shoulders tensed. "He speaks," Nathan said, his voice a low rasp, "but the words are locked inside." He set the knife down. He looked into the fire, and his eyes, usually so sharp and present, went far away. "He saw his mother die," Nathan said. The words fell into the quiet room, heavy and absolute. "My wife, Kaya," he said the name as if it hurt his mouth. "The mining men, the ones with red beards. They came at sunrise. They came for the land, for the gold they thought we were hiding. They came to cleanse." He picked up a stick and pushed the logs in the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I told him to hide. I told him to be silent, no matter what. A good warrior's son. He did as I said. He hid in the brush, by the creek. He was so quiet. He watched them. He watched them find Kaya." Nathan's hand clenched on the stick, his knuckles white. He watched her fight, and he watched her fall. He did not make a sound. When I found him, hours later, after the smoke, he was in the same spot. He was just looking. He has not made a word since. The silence he used to save his life, it has now become his prison. Ella's hand went to her own stomach, a protective, instinctive motion. She thought of Edgar, of his men, of the rumors of red beards on his payroll. The evil was not abstract. It was not in Santa Fe. It was here. It had a name. She did not offer him pity. She saw that he would hate it. Instead, she offered him the only thing she had. "I am sorry for your wife," she said, her voice clear. "And I am sorry for Jacob. They were taken by the same greed." He looked at her, a long, searching look. He saw a partner in loss. He nodded once, and the conversation was over. A few days later, the cold broke, and a false spring day brought a weak sun. Tate, growing bolder, ventured out of the cabin. He stayed within sight, playing near a large tumble of rocks at the edge of the clearing. He was picking up small, bright stones, a game only he understood. Ella was outside, hanging a blanket to air. When she saw it, she was not even sure what she was seeing at first. A shadow, a flicker of tawny movement on the rocks above the boy. Her blood turned to ice. A mountain lion. It was thin, ribs showing, its belly drawn tight with hunger. It was poised on a ledge not 20 feet above Tate, its tail twitching. It was not looking at her. It was looking at the boy. Ella opened her mouth to scream, but only a choked gasp came out. "Tate!" she finally shrieked, her voice cracking. The boy looked up, confused. Nathan was on the roof, finishing the last patch. He did not use the ladder. He dropped. He hit the hard-packed earth in a crouch, one hand down for balance, and came up in a single, fluid motion. He snatched the axe from the woodpile as he passed, his speed terrifying. "Yeah, hey," he roared, a sound that was not human, a sound that ripped from his chest, a battle cry meant to draw death to himself. He ran, covering the ground in 3 long strides, and shoved his son hard, sending the boy tumbling behind him. Nathan raised the axe, placing his own body between his child and the cat. The lion hissed, its ears flat, its lips pulling back from yellow teeth. It was cornered, angry, and ready to leap. Thwack! The sound was sharp, like a heavy branch snapping. The lion jerked. An arrow was suddenly protruding from its throat, high, near the jaw. The cat shuddered, a strangled cough, and then pitched forward, tumbling from the ledge and landing in a heap on the ground. Dead. Ella was panting, her hand pressed to her chest. Tate was frozen, his eyes wide. Nathan did not lower the axe. He spun, searching the trees, the rocks above, the source of the arrow. He was scanning for a new enemy. "Show yourself," he called out, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You have grown careless." "Cousin," a voice called back. It was a woman's voice, sharp and clear. A figure stepped out from the dense pine trees. It was a woman, dressed in worn buckskin trousers and a fur-lined vest. She was tall, lean as a whip, and she moved with a predator's grace. In her hand, she held a long, beautifully made bow. Her face was hard, angular, and her black eyes missed nothing. Nathan lowered the axe, his shoulders slumping with a relief that was almost as profound as his tension. "Wheela," he breathed. The woman, Wheela, did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Ella. She scanned her from head to foot, taking in the cabin, the repaired roof, the pregnant belly. Her eyes were filled with suspicion and a cold, hard grief. "This is where you hide," Wheela said, her English perfect but accented, "in the house of a white woman." "She is not my keeper," Nathan said. She freed us." Freed Wheela scoffed, and her eyes flicked to Ella's bare left hand. "She paid for you. It is not the same." "No," Ella said, finding her voice. It came out shaking, but she held the woman's gaze. "He is free. He stays because he chooses." Wheela looked at Ella for a long, hard moment. She was assessing. "You paid? What did it cost you?" "My husband's ring," Ella said. Wheela's expression softened. "Just a fraction. You paid with your past. Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Ella said simply. Wheela nodded, as if this answer made sense to her. "I am Wheela, Kaya. Kaya was my mother's sister, my cousin." She looked at Nathan. "I have been following you since the town. I watched them sell you. I could not act, not alone." She knelt by the dead lion, her hand surprisingly gentle on its fur. "There are others. From the raid. 12 of us. We are hidden in the high canyons. We are sick and we are hungry, but we are alive." This was a revelation. Nathan had thought he and Tate were the only ones. "You did well to kill this," Wheela said, nodding to the cat. "It will feed us for 3 days." She stood. "The town hates you now. White woman. I heard them in the saloon. The preacher, Armstrong, the one with the dead eyes, Edgar. They mean to take your child and this land." "I know," Ella said. "Good," Wheela said. "Then you know who your friends are." She looked at Nathan. "We will take the cat. We will bring you food. Real food. You are one of us. And you," she said, looking at Ella, "you are, for now, under our protection, because you protected him." She and Nathan worked together, a silent, practiced team, butchering the lion with a speed that was both efficient and respectful. Wheela left a share for them and vanished back into the pines, carrying the rest. That night, the cabin felt different. It was no longer a refuge for 3. It was an outpost. The weight of the day, of the danger, of Wheela's news, pressed on Ella. She was restless. She felt trapped. She began to sweep the floor, the rough bristles of the broom catching on the uneven planks. Scrape, thump. The broom head caught on something. A floorboard, near the hearth. It was loose. Jacob had always meant to fix it, but he never had. She knelt, her belly making it awkward, and pushed the quilt aside. She got her fingers under the edge of the board. It was not nailed down. It lifted easily. Beneath it was a small, dark hollow, lined with canvas, and inside was an oilcloth packet. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Nathan, seeing her freeze, moved from his post at the door. He knelt near her, not touching, just watching, his shadow falling over her. Her hands were trembling so hard she could barely untie the waxed string. She fumbled it open. Inside, 3 things. A heavy, polished Colt revolver. It was clean, oiled. Jacob's gun, the one Edgar had said was lost in the collapse. A rolled piece of parchment, and a worn, leather-bound journal. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Jacob's. She opened it. The first pages were what she expected. Notes on the mine, on timbering, on assay results. Then, the entries changed. October 10th, she read, her voice a whisper. I found it. Not a seam, a river. It runs deep. The old ones were right. She flipped a few pages, her hands shaking. October 23rd, Edgar came to the site. He does not like the cost of the new safety beams. He says I am wasting money. I told him a man's life is worth the wood. He laughed. Nathan was motionless, listening. November 2nd, I confronted him. I told him what I found. I told him it is too much. It is not ours to take. I told him I sent the maps and my true will to Simmons in Santa Fe. I am setting up a trust. The land, the eagle's heart. It belongs to the people, the Comanche. We take only enough. The rest is for them, to make amends. Ella's breath caught. She looked up at Nathan, her eyes wide with the implication. She read the last entry, written the day before his death. November 5th. Edgar knows. I told him about the trust. He looked at me. He did not look like my brother. He looked like a stranger. He said I was a fool, and that he would not let me give his inheritance to savages. The new timbering in Shaft 4. It looks wrong. It looks too weak. I will check it myself in the morning. Ella made a small, choked sound. It was not an accident. It was murder. Edgar had killed him. The journal fell from her hands. The room, the world, all of it dissolved into a blur of suffocating grief and white-hot rage. She doubled over, a sob tearing from her throat, a sound of such raw pain that Tate whimpered in his sleep. She was falling, and there was no bottom. Then, a presence, solid, warm. Nathan had not spoken. He did not offer words. He simply reached out and placed his large, calloused hand on her trembling shoulder. He did not pull her up. He did not pat her. He just held. His hand was an anchor, a solid, living thing in her swirling darkness. He was not trying to fix it. He was just staying with her, a silent witness, sharing the crushing weight of the truth. His hand was a solid weight on her shoulder, an anchor that held her as the storm of Jacob's last words crashed over her. She wept, not quiet tears, but the hard, ragged sobs of betrayal. She wept for the goodness of her husband, and for the black, bottomless greed of his brother. Nathan did not move. He knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his presence a silent wall against the night. He let her grieve, his silence a strange, hard comfort. How long she knelt there, holding the journal, she did not know. The fire burned down to red embers. Tate murmured in his sleep, finally. The wave of grief subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. It was not just a legal fight. It was not just a battle for her child. It was a reckoning. She finally looked up, her face stained with tears, But her eyes were not soft. They were hard. She looked at the oiled Colt revolver. Now hers. A soft scrape at the door. Barely a sound. Nathan was on his feet instantly, the knife in his hand. He moved to the side of the door. "Who is it?" Ella whispered, her heart leaping. "Wheeler," a voice replied from the darkness outside. Nathan unbarred the door. The tall, lean woman stood in the moonlight, her bow in her hand. She did not enter. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the darkness behind her. "They are coming," Wheeler said, her voice low. "I found tracks. 2 men, not Comanche, shod boots, heavy. They were watching this place. They followed the tracks back to the saloon. Men of the preacher." "Armstrong," Ella breathed. "They spy," Wheeler said. "They will not wait long. When they come, it will not be with 2 men. It will be with many." When Nathan asked, "Soon," Wheeler said. "The sun rises. They will use the light." She looked at Ella, her gaze lingering on the journal in her lap and the gun beside it. "You have a weapon. Good, but it is not enough. We will be watching from the rocks." She vanished as silently as she had arrived, melting back into the shadows of the canyon. Nathan barred the door again. He did not go back to his bedroll. He took the Colt revolver from the floor. He checked the action, his movements practiced and sure. He saw it was loaded, all 6 chambers. He looked at Ella. "They will use the law first," he said. "The paper. The men with guns are for after." "And the doctor," Ella said, remembering Owen's warning. "To prove I am mad." Nathan nodded. He took Jacob's heavy coat from the peg by the door, the one she had not been able to touch. He handed it to her. "Put this on," he said. "What?" "He must not see you afraid," Nathan said. "He must not see you weak. He must see the wife of the man he murdered." Ella understood. She slid her arms into the heavy wool coat. It still smelled faintly of Jacob, of pipe tobacco and iron ore. She stood, the journal in one hand, the other on her belly. The cold resolve of the night had settled into steel. They did not have to wait long. Just as the first thin, gray light of dawn touched the canyon rim, they heard it. Not the silent tread of Wheeler, but the heavy, clumsy sound of shod horses on the rocky trail. There were many of them. Nathan put his hand on Tate, who was stirring by the fire. "Stay," he whispered, and the boy froze, his eyes wide. Nathan moved to the side of the single window, a shadow against the wall. The Colt held low, out of sight. Ella stood in the center of the room, by the table. She was facing the door. The sound of horses stopped. There was a low murmur of voices, then the thud of heavy boots on the hard-packed earth. A loud, authoritative knock hammered the door. "Ella, Mrs. Whitlow." It was Edgar's voice, full of false concern. "Open this door." Ella did not move. "Ella, we are here for your own good." Reverend Armstrong's voice joined in, booming and righteous. "We have come to save you from this open in the name of the Lord." Still, she waited. "Bar is down, sir," a rough voice said. "Then take it down," Edgar commanded. A heavy object, probably a rifle butt, slammed into the door. The new bar Nathan had carved held. Another slam, and the wood of the door itself splintered. "Stop!" Ella called out, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the morning air. The noise stopped. "I am coming out," she said. "There is no need to destroy my home." She looked at Nathan. He nodded, once, and faded back into the deepest shadows of the cabin's corner. Ella walked to the door. She did not touch the bar. She simply lifted the journal. She held it against her, took a deep breath, and slid the heavy bar free. She pulled the door open and stepped out onto the small porch. The sight that greeted her almost made her falter, but Jacob's coat held her steady. It was not 2 men, it was 10. Edgar Whitlow was at the front, his fine coat on, his red beard neatly trimmed. Beside him, looking pale and nervous, was Dr. Winters, holding his black medical bag. Behind them, fanned out in a half-circle, were 8 of Edgar's most loyal mine enforcers, all of them carrying rifles. Reverend Armstrong stood to one side, his face a mask of holy satisfaction. And behind them, huddled at a safe distance, was a small crowd of curious townspeople, perhaps 20 or 30, who had followed the armed posse from town. It was a public spectacle. It was a trial. "Ella, thank God," Edgar said, stepping forward, his hands spread in a show of relief. "We were so worried. This creature, he has had you captive." "He is not a creature."
"Edgar," Ella said, her voice steady, "and I am not your prisoner." "Now, Ella," Dr. Winters said, stepping up, his voice a nervous flutter, "we are just here to check on your health. The Reverend and your brother-in-law, they are concerned. This ordeal. A woman in your condition. We have a wagon. We will take you to town, where you can be looked after properly." "You are here to declare me mad, Doctor," Ella said, her eyes pinning him. "You are here to sign a paper so she pointed at Edgar, can take my child."
Dr. Winters flushed a deep, blotchy red.
That is not. The circumstances are highly irregular."
"She is addled," Armstrong declared. "She is consorting with the heathen. It has poisoned her mind. See how she defies us. See how she protects the savage." "Where is he?" Edgar demanded, his eyes scanning the dark doorway behind her. "Where's the Comanche? Send him out."
"He is not here for you,"
Ella said. "Ella, this is your last chance," Edgar said, his voice hardening, the false kindness dropping away. He was losing control of the crowd, who were
"Give up this madness. Come with the doctor, or we will be forced to come in and take you."
"You are not here for my health, Edgar," Ella said, her voice rising, clear and strong, carrying to the onlookers. "You are not here for my soul. You are not even here for my child." She raised the leather-bound book high, so everyone could see it. "You are here for this." Edgar froze. His face, which had been set in a mask of concern, went utterly blank. He recognized the book. "What is that?" one of the townspeople called out.
"It is my husband's journal, Edgar,"
Ella said, her eyes locked on his, "the one you said was lost in the collapse?" A gasp went through the small crowd. Edgar's face turned from blank to a pale, sickly white.
That is a lie," he stammered. "A forgery. She is mad."
"Am I?" Ella's voice dripped with ice. "Or did Jacob write it all down? Did he write about the eagle's heart? Edgar, did he write about the trust he was setting up for the Comanche people?" The crowd murmured, this new information spreading like fire.
"Did he write?"
Ella continued, her voice breaking but full of fury. "About the faulty timbers in Shaft 4, did he write that he was afraid, that he confronted you, and that you looked at him like a stranger?" Witchcraft Armstrong roared, his face purple. "She is speaking in tongues. Do not listen to her." But the crowd was listening. Owen Miller was there, at the front of the onlookers, his face grim. "Let her speak, Reverend." "She has nothing," Edgar shouted, his voice cracking. "It is the word of a mad woman against mine." "No." The voice was not Ella's. It was not Edgar's. It was small. It was rusty. The crowd went silent. Tate stepped out of the cabin. He had Nathan's knife in his small hand, held like a toy he did not understand. He was trembling, but his eyes were fixed on Edgar. Nathan stepped out behind him, his hands empty, placing himself between his son and the gunman. Tate pointed the knife, not at Edgar, but just pointing. His finger was too small for the gesture. "Redbeard," Tate whispered. Edgar looked at the boy as if he were a ghost. "Redbeard," Tate said again, his voice stronger, gaining power from the memory. He order, burn tent." The world stopped. The silence was absolute. The wind had died. A bird in a far-off tree was the only sound. Edgar Whitlow was exposed. The townspeople, the doctor, his own gunman. They all looked at him, seeing the face of a man who had not just stolen from his brother, but had massacred children. Edgar's mind snapped, his face contorted, the mask of civilization gone, replaced by the raw, panicked animal beneath. "Lies!" he screamed, his voice a raw shriek. He fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a heavy revolver. "Lies! I will shut your lying mouths, all of you!" He raised the gun, his hand shaking, pointing it not at Ella, but at the small boy who had just condemned him. Nathan moved. He was a blur, a streak of desperate, protective fury. He lunged, not at Edgar, but at Ella, shoving her off the porch and into the dirt, covering her pregnant body with his own. Thwack! Wila's arrow. It flew from the rocks above, a silent streak of death, and embedded itself deep in Edgar's right shoulder, the one holding the gun. Edgar screamed, a sound of pain and rage. His arm jerked from the impact, his finger, already on the trigger, clenched. The gun fired. The shot did not go wide. It went down. The bullet slammed into the heavy iron head of Jacob's axe, which was still embedded in the chopping block at the foot of the porch. Ping. The sound was sharp, a metallic scream. The lead bullet, deformed, ricocheted. It flew up, spinning, and struck Edgar Whitlow in the throat. He dropped the gun. His hand went to his neck, his eyes wide with a terrible, gurgling surprise. He looked at Ella, then at the journal on the ground. A fountain of red blood pulsed between his fingers. He made a sound, a wet, choking noise, and pitched forward, dead before he hit the ground. The gunmen stared, their rifles half raised, unsure who to shoot. Dr. Winters was retching into a bush. Reverend Armstrong was frozen, his mouth open, his prayer half finished. Into the silence, Sheriff Durant rode up, his own pistol drawn. 2 deputies were behind him. He had not been far. "Drop your weapons," Durant said, his voice flat, but carrying the weight of the law. "All of you." The gunmen, their leader dead, their purpose gone, slowly lowered their rifles. Durant dismounted. He looked at the body. He looked at the arrow in the shoulder. He looked at the smoking pistol on the ground. He looked at the mark on the axe head. "Holy Mother," one of his deputies whispered. Durant looked at Ella, who was being helped up by Nathan. She was covered in dirt, her face pale as a sheet, but she was alive. She pushed Nathan away gently and walked forward. She picked up the journal from the dust. Her hands were shaking. She held it out to the sheriff. "This is what he died for. Sheriff," she said, "it is Jacob's. It is the truth." Durant took the book. He opened it, looked at the last entry, and then snapped it shut. He tucked it into his coat. He turned to the crowd. "Go home. It is over. The doctor will see to the body." The townspeople, their faces pale and shaken, began to drift away, silent, looking at each other. The foundation of their town's power shattered in a single, bloody morning. Durant looked at Armstrong. The Reverend had found his voice. This is God's judgment," Armstrong sputtered. "No, Reverend," Durant said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "This is a crime scene. You were part of this. You incited this. You go back to your church, and you pray. And if I hear one more word from you about this woman, or that man, or that child, I will arrest you for inciting a riot and being an accessory to murder. You are to cleanse nothing. Do you understand me?" Armstrong, for the first time in his life, was silent. He turned, his black coat flapping, and stormed away. Durant looked at Ella. "You are safe, Mrs. Whitlow. For now, the journal is evidence. I will hold it. But this is not over. Armstrong is a zealot, and the mining company, they will not like this." He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and he and his deputies, and the wagon bearing Edgar's body, left. That night, the cabin was silent. The splintered door was barred. Nathan and Tate were there. Wila had come, seen they were safe, and left a brace of rabbits. But Ella could not stop shaking. She sat on the cot, the heavy quilt wrapped around her, but the cold was inside her. It was the aftershock of the violence, the sight of Edgar's death, the terrible, final justice of it. The baby was kicking, a frantic, worried tumbling inside her, as if it, too, had felt the terror. Nathan watched her. He had been cleaning the rifle he had taken from one of Edgar's men, but he stopped. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, in front of her. "It is over," he said. "Is it?" she whispered, her teeth chattering. "Armstrong is still out there. The company. They will just send another Edgar." "We will face them," he said. "I cannot," she said, a sob catching in her throat. "I am so cold, I cannot stop shaking." He saw her hands, clenched white on the quilt. He reached out, his own hands large and scarred from work and from war. He did not pull the quilt tighter. He did not touch her shoulder. He took her hands. He unfolded her clenched fingers and wrapped them in his. His skin was warm, rough, and incredibly steady. Her hands were like ice, trembling violently. He did not say anything else. He did not pull her close. He simply knelt on the cold floor, holding her hands, lending her his warmth, his stillness. He was an anchor, just as he had been the night before. She leaned forward, her body still trembling, and rested her forehead against his. It was not a kiss. It was not passion. It was something more basic. It was two survivors, in the dark, sharing breath. A silent promise that neither of them was alone in the fight. He stayed like that, his head bowed to hers, his hands holding hers, until the last of the tremors faded, and the frantic kicking in her belly gentled to a slow, steady roll. The silence that followed Edgar's death did not last. Goldridge, shocked by the public execution and the subsequent revelations, fell quiet for 2 days, a stunned, uneasy quiet. Sheriff Durant was investigating, his face a granite mask, but the power vacuum was a wound attracting flies, and the chief among them was Reverend Abel Armstrong. He did not preach. He acted. Wheela brought the news, slipping into the cabin on the third night like a cold draft. Her face was grim, her eyes hard. "He is not finished," she said, stripping the icy moccasins from her feet and warming her hands by the fire. Nathan sat opposite her, cleaning the rifle. Tate was asleep. Ella was on the cot, her body heavy and weary, her hands resting on her belly. Durant warned him. Ella said, her voice tired. "The sheriff is one man," Wheela said, her voice sharp with contempt, "and he only controls Goldridge. Armstrong rode east, to the camps at 7 Rivers. He is not speaking of law. He is speaking of holy war. He is telling them the gold of the eagle's heart is a demonic trap, and that this cabin is a nest of the serpent. He is offering money, the company's money." "Mercenaries," Nathan said, his voice a low growl. He did not look up from the rifle. "Yes," Wheela said, "men who do not know Jacob Whitlow, men who do not care about the law, men who are paid to kill. He is gathering an army." As if summoned by her words, the wind changed. The low whistle it had been making in the chimney all evening died, and a deep, heavy silence fell, a silence that was heavier, more suffocating than the noise. Nathan rose. He walked to the window, pushed aside the cloth, and looked out. "Snow," he said. It had begun, not a gentle flurry, but a thick, determined fall. The flakes were large and wet, coming down in a solid gray curtain. "The storm is here," Wheela said, a new worry in her voice. "I must go. My people are not prepared." "You will not make the high canyon in this," Nathan said, letting the curtain fall. "The passes will be blind in an hour." Wheela looked at him, then at Ella. "No, I will not. She was trapped, just as they were." The storm was a living thing. It was not a storm, it was a siege. For 2 days, the world vanished. There was no canyon, no town, no sky. There was only the white, howling void outside, and the small, dim cabin within. The wind screamed, a constant, high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from inside their skulls. Snow piled in great, soft drifts against the door, sealing them in. They existed in a strange, suspended time. Nathan and Wheeler took turns watching, one at the window, one at the hearth. They ate the last of the lion meat and the rabbits. The cold was so intense it found every crack in the cabin. On the third day of the storm, Ella awoke from a restless sleep with a sharp, liquid warmth. She gasped. "Nathan," she said, her voice small. He was across the room, but he heard her. He was by her side in an instant, his face taut in the dim light. "What is it?" "The baby," she whispered, a new, sharp pain making her clench her teeth. "It is. My water. It broke. It is too soon. It is too early." She was 8 months, not 9. Wheeler was there, pushing Nathan gently aside. Her face, usually so hard, was all business, but her eyes were not unkind. She felt Ella's forehead, then looked at the cot. "It is not too soon," Wheeler said, her voice firm, cutting through Ella's rising panic. "It is now. The baby is coming now." "I cannot," Ella panted, another contraction seizing her, a giant, invisible hand crushing her spine. "The storm. I am not ready." "The child does not care for the storm," Wheeler said. "And you are ready." She looked at Nathan, who stood nearby, a large, useless, terrified man. "Boil water, all the blankets, and tear strips from that old sheet. And you," she said, her voice softening as she turned back to Ella, "you will breathe, like this, with me." The cabin became a forge. The howling wind outside was the bellows, and the fire in Ella's body was the furnace. The hours that followed were a blur of red and white pain. Ella lost time. There was only the storm inside her, a pain so vast it blotted out the storm outside. She clung to Wheeler's hands, her knuckles white. "I cannot do this," she screamed, her back arching off the cot as another wave hit. "It is too much. It is killing me." "It is not killing you," Wheeler shouted back, her voice a sharp, grounding force. "It is bringing life. You are a warrior." Ella Whitlow. "Now, push against me." Nathan stood in the shadows, his hands clenched, his face a mask of agony. He was a man who had faced death, who had fought bears and armed men, and he had never been so terrified. This was a battle he could not fight for her. "Go outside," Wheeler had snapped at him, an hour in. "No," Ella had gasped, her eyes finding his in the gloom. "Do not, please, stay." So he stayed. He moved from the shadows. He knelt by the cot, by her head. He took the hand Wheeler was not holding. It was slick with sweat, and she gripped him with a strength that was inhuman. "I am here. Ella," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble in her ear. "I am here. I will not leave." She turned her face toward him, her eyes blind with pain, and she saw him. He was not her husband. He was not her lover. He was the man who had stayed. "It hurts," she wept, her body trembling. "I know," he said. "Breathe. I am breathing with you." And he did. He held her hand. His head bowed, and as she screamed, he breathed. He poured his own stillness, his own strength, into her, a silent, steady anchor. "Now," Ella Wheeler commanded, her voice urgent. "The child is here. One more. Give me everything." Ella screamed. It was not a scream of pain, but of raw, primal effort. It was a roar that rivaled the storm. She bore down, her body splitting, her world ending. And in the sudden, echoing silence that followed, there was a new sound, a thin, sputtering wail. "A girl," Wheeler said, her voice suddenly soft, filled with a weary awe. "You have a daughter, Ella." Ella fell back, boneless, her lungs empty. She was weeping, but these were not tears of pain. Nathan's hand, which she had been crushing, was numb. He gently loosened his grip, but she did not let him go. Wela, her movements quick and practiced, cleaned the small, bloody, perfect creature and wrapped her in a piece of clean, torn sheet. She placed the baby in Ella's arms. "Oh," Ella whispered, looking at the tiny, furious red face. "Oh, Jacob, she is here." She had dark, wet hair and a mouth that was already rooting for life. Nathan looked at the child, and the hardness in his face, the winter in his eyes that had been there since the day Ella first saw him. It melted. A look of profound, unguarded tenderness softened his features. A small sound came from the hearth. Tate, who had been hiding under his quilt, his hands over his ears, had crawled out. He stood by the cot, his large, dark eyes fixed on the small bundle. He looked at the baby, then at Ella, then at his father. A slow, hesitant, beautiful smile spread across his face. It was the first time Ella had ever seen him smile. Ella, her heart so full it felt like it would burst, smiled back through her tears. "This is your new sister," she whispered. Her name is Hope." The moment was perfect. A small, warm island of life in the middle of the howling, frozen sea. It lasted for one perfect, peaceful hour. Then the door hammered. It was not a knock. It was a fist, pounding with an urgency that defied the storm. Nathan had the rifle in his hand before the second knock. Wela had her bow. "Who is it?" Nathan roared. "It is Singing Bird," a voice cried from the white void, thin with exhaustion. "Let me in by the spirits. Let me in." Wela and Nathan exchanged a look. Singing Bird was the eldest of their small, hidden band, an elder so old he was said to have seen the Spanish. Nathan barred the door. A figure stumbled in, a human shape made of snow and ice. It was an old man, his face a web of deep wrinkles, his breath coming in ragged, frozen clouds. He collapsed by the hearth, his chest heaving. Wela was at his side, holding a cup of hot water to his lips. "Singing Bird," Nathan said, his voice urgent. "What is it? You should not be out. No one could travel in this." "They are traveling," the old man gasped, his eyes wild. "They are coming. I saw them. I came. Ahead." "Who is coming?" Ella asked, clutching Hope to her chest. "The preacher," Singing Bird said. "Armstrong. He does not have 20 men. He has more. And they are not in Goldridge. They came from the east. They are at the mouth of the canyon. They use the storm as cover." The blood drained from Ella's face. "They are not waiting for the storm to end," the elder said, his voice growing stronger with the fire's warmth. "They are waiting for light. They mean to burn this cabin. And the preacher, he has a map, the one from the dead man. He is going to the sacred valley. He is going to Eagle's Heart. He says he will tear the gold from the ground and salt the earth with our bones." A cold, terrible silence fell. They were trapped. The storm that had been their shield was now their prison. "We cannot fight them here," Wela said, her voice flat. "The cabin is a box. They will burn us alive." "We cannot run," Ella said, her voice shaking. She looked down at the tiny, 1-hour-old baby in her arms. Hope. "She cannot. I cannot." Nathan looked at the door, barred against the storm. He looked at the splintered wood, still visible from Edgar's attack. He looked at Ella, pale and bleeding, and at the newborn child. Then he looked at Wela. "No," Nathan said. "We cannot run, and we cannot stay. So we fight." "Here," Wela said, her voice full of disbelief. "No, not here," Nathan said, and his eyes met the elders. "In the valley, in Eagle's Heart. It is sacred ground," Singing Bird whispered, "a place of life, not battle." "They are coming to defile it anyway," Nathan said, his voice like iron. "We will use the sacred ground to protect the life they would destroy. The terrain is ours. We know the rocks. We know the wind." "It is madness," Wela said, "to move her and the child in this." "It is the only way," Ella said. Her voice was weak, but it cut through the room. They all looked at her. She was sitting up, her face pale as the snow outside. But her eyes were the eyes of the woman who had bought them, the woman who had faced Edgar. "He is right," she said. "If we stay here, we die. My baby dies. If we move, we have a chance. You can lure them in. The valley." Jacob said it was narrow. "You can use the high ground." The air in the cabin was thick with the impossible choice: to move a woman who had just given birth, and her newborn, into a blizzard, into a battle. "The snow," Wheela said, a new, cold understanding in her voice. "It is deep. It covers the old blood. It will make a new page." Singing Bird nodded, rising to his feet. The weariness was gone, replaced by a grim purpose. "The spirits of the mountain will fight with us. The snow will be our ally. It will hide our traps. The wind will carry our arrows." He and Wheela began to move, their actions swift, a silent, deadly ballet. They checked their bowstrings. They spoke in low, rapid Comanche, their hands sketching maps in the air. They would set crossfire from the high pines, use snow-covered deadfalls to break the mercenaries' charge. The choice was made. Ella, wincing, swung her legs off the cot. The world tilted, but she held on to the bed frame. Nathan was at her side, his arm steadying her. "I can walk," she said, her voice tight with pain. He did not argue. He simply took the heaviest quilt, wrapped it around her and the baby, who was now bundled so tightly only her tiny nose was visible. He lifted her. She was light in his arms, but she was trembling. "We must go," Wheela said from the door, which she had unbarred. A wall of white, swirling snow greeted them. Nathan looked down at Ella. She was looking up at him, her eyes wide with terror, but also with a fierce, unbreakable trust. He was her shield. He leaned down, just once, and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of shared life, of shared breath. It was a promise. He did not say he would return. He did not say they would win. His vow was simpler, deeper. He was with her. "Now," he said. He stepped out onto the porch, carrying the woman and the child, and was swallowed by the white, Singing Bird and Wheela. Two shadows moved ahead, and Tate, his face grim, his father's knife clutched in his hand, followed in the footprints they left. The journey to Eagle's Heart was a waking nightmare. It was not a mile, but it was a vertical, treacherous climb, made in the teeth of a dying blizzard. Nathan carried Ella, who held the bundled hope against her own body, her warmth and the quilt the child's only shield. He moved with a slow, agonizing deliberation, his moccasins, now shredded, offering little grip on the snow-slicked rock. Wheela and Singing Bird moved ahead, testing the path, their knowledge of the terrain the only thing keeping them from sliding into the white darkness. Tate followed in Nathan's footsteps, a small, grim shadow, his father's knife now tucked into his belt, his hand clutching the rifle Nathan had given him to carry. They reached the valley just as the sky began to bleed from black to a deep, bruised purple. It was not a valley, but a deep, narrow canyon, a wound in the earth. The walls were sheer pine and granite, and the floor was a small, flat expanse, miraculously sheltered. A frozen creek cut through it. This was the sacred ground. Wheela did not waste time. Her small band of 12 survivors, gaunt shadows in the dawn light, emerged from hidden crevices. They were mostly women, old men, and boys. But their eyes were hard. Wheela was their weapon, and Singing Bird was their will. Wheela pointed, her commands short, guttural sounds in their own tongue. They took the high ground, melting into the pines and rocks that lined the canyon rim, a dozen ghosts with bows. "Here," Wheela said to Nathan, pointing to a shallow cave, little more than a den in the rocks, set 20 feet up the canyon wall, shielded by a curtain of ancient ivy. The woman, the children. They will be safe. They can see, but they will not be seen. Nathan climbed, his muscles screaming. He set Ella down inside. It was cold, but it was dry. He gave Tate the single water skin. "You are the man of this den," he said, his voice low. "You protect your sister. You protect her." He did not touch the boy, but the weight of his words was a heavy, solemn mantle. Tate nodded, his small face ancient, and took up a position at the mouth of the cave, the knife in his lap. Ella was pale, her body trembling with exhaustion and the first tremors of blood loss, but her eyes were clear. "Nathan," she whispered, her hand finding his. He squeezed it, once, hard. "I will not let them reach you." He slid down the rock face, taking up his own position in a tumble of boulders that guarded the narrow path to the cave. He had the rifle, and he had Jacob's axe. The sun broke the horizon, and the world became a blinding sheet of white and gold. The snow in the valley was pristine, a perfect, unmarked page. It was a place of impossible beauty, waiting to be stained. They heard the mercenaries before they saw them. The crunch of heavy boots, the jingle of gear, the low, coarse laughter of men who were being paid well to do a dark job. They emerged from the canyon mouth. There were more than 20, a rough collection of hired guns from the Seven Rivers camps, men with dead eyes and trigger-happy fingers. At their head, on horseback, was Reverend Abel Armstrong. His face was not the face of a holy man. It was the face of a zealot, his eyes shining with a terrible, righteous fire, his black coat stark against the snow. And guiding him, walking at the head of his horse, was another native man. He was tall, his face hard, but his eyes darted left and right, never meeting the canyon walls. "Crow's wing," Wheela whispered from the ridge above, her voice a venomous hiss. "He guides them. He sells his mother's bones for their whiskey money." Armstrong reined in his horse, his gaze falling on the small, still smoking fire Wheela had set as a decoy in the center of the clearing. He raised his hand. "They are here," he boomed, his voice echoing off the rock. "The heathens, the witch, they are trapped. We will cleanse this valley. We will purify this ground with their blood. No survivors, wipe them out." He had no map. He had Crow's Wing, and he had his own greed. The mercenaries, eager for the fight and the gold they had been promised, let out a ragged yell and charged forward, their rifles barking. They ran, a disorganized mob, straight into the center of the killing floor. Now, Wheela's voice called from the pines. It was not a command, it was a sentence. A rain of arrows fell. It was not a volley, it was a precise, deadly, and silent storm. Men screamed, clutching at their throats, their chests, their eyes. The pristine white snow was suddenly horribly red. The narrow canyon, which had seemed a trap for the Comanche, had become one for the attackers. Their superior rifles were useless. They were too close to each other, their firing lines blocked, and the enemy was everywhere and nowhere, hidden in the blinding white and the dark pines above. Nathan waited. He held his fire. The main group of mercenaries recoiled from the arrows, falling back in confusion, firing wildly at the cliffs. "Circle them," the mercenary leader, a hard man with a thick beard, shouted, "Find the shooters! Flank them!" 4 men, smarter than the rest, broke from the main group and saw the path leading up the rock slide, the path that led to Wheela's flank and to the cave. "Up here," one shouted. They started to climb. Now, Nathan moved. He rose from the boulders, not a man, but a force, the first mercenary. His rifle raised, looked up, and saw Nathan's face. He had no time to scream. Nathan's rifle fired, once, and the man fell backward. The other 3, seeing him, opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him, stinging his face with stone chips. He dropped the empty rifle and took the axe. He met the second man on the narrow path. The man swung his rifle like a club. Nathan ducked under it, and the heavy axe Jacob's axe, swung in a low, brutal arc, severing the man's leg. The man shrieked and fell. The third came, knife in hand. Nathan did not stop. He was a whirlwind, his rage and his fear channeled into a single, deadly purpose. He buried the axe in the man's chest. From above, Wheela was fighting her own battle. She was firing, moving, a ghost among the trees. An arrow, loosed from a mercenary on the valley floor, lanced up. A lucky shot. It struck her, not in the chest, but high in the side, just under her arm. She cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, and stumbled, leaning against a pine. The man who had shot her cheered. Wheela, her face a mask of white-hot agony, raised her bow one more time, drew, and loosed. Her arrow flew true, finding the man's cheering, open mouth, silencing him forever. She slumped against the tree, clutching her side, but she was not out of the fight. But the tide was turning. There were too many. The remaining dozen mercenaries, hardened and furious, had found cover and were laying down a field of fire. Wheela's small band was pinned. Nathan turned, breathing hard, to see a new threat. 3 more mercenaries, led by the bearded leader, were at the base of the path. They had seen him. "It is just one man," the leader roared. "Kill him! The preacher wants the woman!" They charged. Nathan, his axe slick, his body bruised, prepared to die. From the cave, Ella watched. She saw it all. She saw Nathan brace. She saw the 3 men charge. Her heart, her world, her hope. It all stopped. She held the baby so tight the small form whimpered. Tate was at her side, his knife in his hand, ready to defend his new sister, a 6-year-old boy against armed men. "No," Ella whispered. "Please, no." A new sound, a new shout. It came from the canyon mouth, from behind the mercenaries. It was not a war cry. It was the sound of thundering hooves. "Durant! It is Sheriff Durant!" a voice roared. And it was not a voice of panic, but of rescue. Sheriff Durant, his face a mask of cold fury, rode into the valley. He was not alone. Behind him, on mules, on workhorses, on foot, were Owen Miller and a dozen miners, the men who had been Jacob's friends. They were armed with rifles, with shotguns, and with their own mining picks. They formed a solid, grim line, cutting off the mercenaries' only retreat. Armstrong, who had been watching the battle from a safe rock, spun his horse. "Sheriff, what is the meaning of this? You are interfering with God's holy work. These are my men." "They are murderers." "Armstrong," Durant said, his pistol level, "and you are under arrest." "You have no authority here," Armstrong shrieked. "The mining company." "The company is not here," Owen Miller said, his old, steady voice cutting through the tension. He was holding a packet of papers, his hand shaking, not with fear, but with righteous anger. "And Edgar Whitlow is dead." He held up a sheaf of documents, the official seal of the Santa Fe courthouse visible even from a distance. "Mr. Simmons, the lawyer. He rode all night," Owen shouted, his voice for the miners, not for Armstrong. "He brought the real will, Jacob Whitlow's will, and he brought this, a legal injunction." He unrolled a paper. "This ain't company land. It ain't your land. Preacher Jacob Whitlow, before he died, he filed it this valley, the Eagle's Heart. He put it into a legal trust. For the Comanche people, he named Nathan Red Elk as the co-beneficiary. It is their land." The miners with Durant looked at each other, and the last of their doubts vanished. This was not a fight against heathens. This was a land grab, a theft, a murder. They turned their guns, as one, on the trapped mercenaries. Armstrong was finished. His men were surrounded, the miners to their back, the Comanche above, and Durant in front. His holy war was over. His face, in the clear morning light, was not that of a zealot. It was that of a cornered, rabid animal. He saw Nathan standing on the path below the cave, wounded, weary, but watching him. He saw the cave, the flash of Ella's pale face. He saw the source of all his ruin. "If I cannot have this valley," Armstrong screamed, his voice cracking into a raw shriek, "then neither will you. I will send your heathen soul to hell myself." He ripped the pistol from his belt, the one he had carried for protection, and aimed it. Not at Durant, but at Nathan. He fired. The sound was shockingly loud. Nathan was thrown back, as if by a giant, invisible hand. The bullet hit him square in the chest. He looked down, a strange, confused look on his face. He saw the dark, spreading stain. He looked up, his eyes finding Ella's in the cave. He kneeled, slowly, then pitched forward onto the snow. Ella screamed. It was a sound with no words, a sound that tore from her soul. Thwack! A third sound. An arrow. It did not come from the pines. Crow's Wing, the guide, who had been standing, forgotten, by Armstrong's horse, had his bow in his hand. His face was a mask of terrible, clear-eyed shame. He had seen the will. He had heard the truth. He had led the man who had shot his own kinsman. His arrow, an arrow of redemption, of a debt paid in blood, was buried in Armstrong's throat. The Reverend dropped his pistol. His hands flew to his neck, his eyes wide with a final, gurgling surprise. He toppled from his horse and fell, face first, into the pure white snow, his own blood the last and darkest stain on the valley floor. Ella's scream was a thin, sharp blade in the sudden, terrible silence. It hung in the clear, freezing air of the valley, an echo of the two shots that had just rung out. On the valley floor, the battle stopped. The mercenaries, trapped between the law at their backs and the unseen arrows from above, stared. They saw their employer, the Reverend Armstrong, topple from his horse, an arrow protruding from his neck. They saw the man they were sent to kill, Nathan Red Elk, crumpled on the snowy path, a dark stain spreading on his chest. The spell was broken by the voice of the law. "Drop your weapons," Sheriff Durant roared, his voice bouncing off the granite walls. He and his deputies, flanked by the grim-faced miners, advanced. On the ground now the fight is done. One by one, the mercenaries, leaderless and surrounded, let their rifles fall. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by the cold, sudden reality of a lost cause. They raised their hands. In the cave, Ella was frozen, her mind unable to process what her eyes had just seen. Nathan was down. He had fallen. He was not moving. But on the rocks below, Singing Bird was. The old man, who had seemed so frail, moved with the speed of a hawk. He scrambled from his hiding place, his ancient legs pumping, and slid down the rock face. Reaching Nathan's side before anyone else, he fell to his knees in the snow beside the fallen warrior, with a small, sharp knife. He ripped open the front of Nathan's bloody buckskin shirt. The entry wound was high on the right side of his chest, small and dark. "Turn him," the elder commanded. And Wheela, clutching her own bleeding side, was there, helping him. They rolled Nathan gently. Singing Bird's weathered fingers probed the man's back. He found it, an exit wound, torn and ragged, lower than the entry. "The spirits are with us," Singing Bird breathed, a cloud of vapor leaving his lips. He pressed his hand against the snow, then against Nathan's face. He breathes. The bullet has passed. It is clean. It missed his heart. The words, a faint echo, reached Ella in the cave. He breathes. The ice in her veins cracked. She was not a spectator. She was a wife, a mother, a survivor. She looked at the baby in her arms. This tiny, perfect life. She looked at Tate, his face a small, white mask of terror. She moved. She did not climb down. She fell, half sliding, half tumbling down the rocky path, her own body, which had just given birth, screaming in protest. The snow was cold against her. The rocks tore at her. But she did not feel it. Her world had narrowed to the man lying in the snow.
She reached him, her knees giving out, and she collapsed at his side. He was so pale. His eyes were closed, his face slack, his breathing a shallow, hitching sound. The snow around him was a terrible, vivid red. "Nathan," she whispered, her hand, trembling, going to his face. His skin was cold. Fear, cold and sharp, seized her again. Was he breathing? Was he truly? Her eyes fell on the bundled child in her arms. With a desperation that was part prayer, part instinct, she gently laid the tiny form of her daughter, Hope, on Nathan's still chest. She watched. She held her own breath. The bundle rose. It fell. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but it was there. The shallow rise and fall of Nathan's breathing was rocking his child. He was alive. Ella bowed her head, her forehead resting on his shoulder, and wept, silent, shuddering tears of relief that were as painful as her grief. Tate was there. He had scrambled down the path behind her. He stood over his father, his small body rigid, his eyes wide and dark. He looked at the blood, at his father's pale face, and his lips trembled. He reached into the small pouch at his belt, the one he had filled with rocks by the cabin. His small fingers fumbled, and he pulled out a single stone. It was a small, smooth, oval rock, a deep, vibrant blue, the color of a summer sky. He reached down, his hands shaking, and pressed the stone into Nathan's limp, open palm. He then curled his father's cold fingers around it, one by one, enclosing the bright stone in a wounded fist. It was his only offering, his most valuable treasure, a prayer from a silent boy, Mrs. Whitlow. Ella looked up. Sheriff Durant was standing over them, his hat in his hand, his face etched with a deep weariness. Owen Miller was at his side, the legal papers still clutched in his hand. "Ma'am," Durant said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "He is alive. We will get him back to town." He turned, his voice hard again, snapping back to the man of the law. "Take them," he ordered his deputies, gesturing to the surrendered mercenaries. "Tie their hands. They will walk back. We will have a trial in Goldridge that will be remembered. Bag the Reverend's body. We will need it for evidence." He looked at the miners, who were standing, stunned by the carnage. "The battle is done. You men, you saved us. You saved the law." Owen Miller stepped forward, his voice shaking but proud. "We saved Jacob's honor." He held up the papers. "Sheriff, the will. It is clear." Durant nodded. He turned to the entire group, his voice projecting so all could hear. "Listen to me, all of you. You are witnesses. I have seen the last will and testament of Jacob Whitlow, certified by the court in Santa Fe. His half-brother Edgar is dead, and his accomplice, the Reverend Armstrong, is dead. Their conspiracy is over." He looked directly at Ella. "The will states that all personal property, the ranch, the house in town, and all assets held by Jacob are left solely to his wife, Ella Whitlow, and to the child she carries, to be held in trust." He paused, then looked at Singing Bird, who was pressing a thick pad of moss and torn cloth against Nathan's wound. "And this valley," Durant declared, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness, "this land, and all mineral rights attached, known as the Eagle's Heart. It has been placed in a permanent, legal trust, a trust for the benefit of the Comanche people, its stewards. The will names its co-trustee to manage the trust on behalf of the tribe." Nathan Red Elk. A murmur went through the miners. It was true. Jacob had not just been a good boss, he had been a just man. A groan came from the snow. Nathan's eyes flickered open. The world was a blur of white light and dark shapes. He felt a searing fire in his chest, and an impossible, heavy cold. He saw Ella's face, inches from his, streaked with tears and dirt.
He saw his son, his hand on his arm. He felt a small, light weight on his chest. He tried to focus. He saw the tiny, bundled form of the baby, rising and falling with his own pained breath.
He understood. He was alive. They were alive.
His lips moved, but only a dry rasp came out. He tried again.
"Ella,"
he whispered.
"I am here,"
she sobbed, pressing her face against his.
"I am here."
He could feel the cold. He knew the line he was walking. It was a thin ridge, with death on either side, but he saw her, and he knew which way he had to walk.
If I live,"
he breathed, the words barely audible, a promise made against a searing pain.
"I will stay."
Ella closed her eyes, her tears falling hot on his cold skin. She held him, her arms around him, protecting him.
"Stay,"
she whispered back, a fierce, desperate command. "Do not leave. We stay, together." Durant turned away, giving them the moment. He walked over to where Crowswing stood, his bow hanging limply from his hand. The guide was not tied. He had not moved. He was watching the family in the snow, his face a mask of shame. "You shot the Reverend," Durant said. It was not a question. Crowswing did not look at him. His eyes were on Singing Bird. "I have sinned against my people," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "I took money from the Redbeard. I led the preacher here to kill my own kin. I did not know, until I heard the will." Durant was silent for a long moment, watching the man. "He paid me in whiskey and silver," Crowswing continued, his confession a bitter torrent. "To find the camp, to lead them here, I am shamed. I am nothing." "You are a witness," Durant said, his voice hard. He pulled out a small notepad. "And you will tell me everything, every name, every price, every word Edgar Whitlow and that preacher said to you." Crowswing nodded. His shoulders slumped. "I will tell." He finally looked at Durant, his eyes hollow. "I saw him shoot. The preacher. He shot a man who was already beaten, a man who was protecting his family." He looked down at the arrow on the ground, the one he had used. "I paid my debt. I will go to the gallows." "Maybe," Durant said, scribbling a note. "And maybe not. The shot you fired saved my life. It saved his—" He nodded at Nathan. "It saved the woman and the child. A judge will hear all of it. Your confession and your act. Now, start talking. When did this begin?" As Crowswing spoke, his voice a low monotone, the world began to change. The battle was over. The adrenaline was gone. The cold was setting in. But the snow had stopped. The last of the storm clouds were breaking apart, moving east. The sun, which had been hidden all day, was now sinking behind the western ridge. It cast a final, brilliant, golden light into the valley. It did not warm the air, but it lit the snow, making the ice crystals on the pines glitter like a million diamonds. The red stains on the snow were still there, but they were now bathed in a clean, forgiving, twilight glow. The air was still. The world was being washed clean. The procession that returned to Goldridge was not a victorious one. It was a slow, agonizing train of the wounded and the dead, a stark accounting of the day's cost. Nathan, his body wrapped in every blanket they had, was carried on a travois built by Wheeler and the miners, a crude but strong litter dragged by Owen Miller's mule. He was unconscious, his breathing a shallow rasp. The blue stone Tate had given him still clutched in his fist. Ella walked beside him. She was on her feet, a feat of impossible willpower. She had just given birth. Her body was torn and bleeding. But she refused to be carried. She held her daughter, Hope, bundled against her chest, a small, warm weight that was both her anchor and her strength. Wheeler and the other wounded Comanche walked as well, their faces grim, their injuries bound with torn strips of cloth. Sheriff Durant and his deputies herded the captured mercenaries, their hands bound. their faces a mixture of sullen anger and the hollow-eyed fear of men who knew they were facing a rope. The miners who had ridden with Owen formed a silent, solemn escort, their rifles now pointed at the ground. And at the back, slung over a mule, were the bodies of Reverend Abel Armstrong and the men who had fallen. They entered the main street of Goldridge just as the cold afternoon sun was setting. The town had been waiting. They had heard the gunfire echoing from the canyon, a distant, terrifying thunder. They spilled from the Copper Star and the general store, their faces drawn and pale. They stopped, silent, as the grim parade passed. They saw their preacher, his body stiff and unholy. They saw the mercenaries, the men Armstrong had called his righteous army, now prisoners. They saw the wounded Comanche, not as savages but as victims. And they saw Ella. They saw the widow, her face pale as death, her skirt stained with her own blood, but walking. They saw the tiny, new bundle in her arms. And they saw Nathan Red Elk, the man they had seen sold in a cage, now a wounded hero, his body broken from defending her. The town's confusion turned to a vast, collective shame. It was a silence deeper than the snow. No one spoke, no one cheered, they just watched, and for the first time, they saw the truth. As they passed the white church, the bell was silent. The building looked hollow, a false front. A few of Armstrong's most devout followers were on the steps, their faces crumpled in disbelief. One woman, a Mrs. Gable, who had loudly condemned Ella, stepped forward. She was weeping. She held out a small, clean blanket. She did not say a word. She just offered it. Wheela, her face a mask, stopped and took it, using it to cover one of the wounded boys. The apology was public, and it was accepted. Durant directed the procession. The mercenaries were marched to the town jail, which was quickly overwhelmed. The remaining men were locked in the empty assay office, under armed guard. The bodies were taken to the undertaker, and Ella, Nathan, Tate, and the wounded Comanche were taken to the only place large enough, the only place that could be a sanctuary, the doctor's office. Dr. Winters met them at the door. He was a changed man. The nervous, complicit man who had followed Edgar's orders was gone. In his place was a man humbled, his face pale, his hands shaking, but his eyes were, for the first time, clear. "Bring him in," he said, his voice hoarse, looking at Nathan. "Bring them all in. My God, child! Ella, what have you done?" "I survived, Doctor," Ella whispered, her knees finally buckling. Owen caught her before she fell. The next 3 days were a fever. Dr. Winters worked without sleep. He set up cots in his office, in his own small home. He pronounced Nathan's wound a miracle. "It passed clean," he said to Ella, who sat in a chair, refusing to sleep, breastfeeding her child, an inch to the left, his lung, an inch to the right, his heart. "It is a terrible wound, but it will heal. He is strong. I have never seen a man this strong." He cleaned and stitched Wheela's side, the woman glaring at him the entire time, her hand on her knife. But she let him, and he was gentle. He tended to the others, his hands, which had once been a tool for Edgar, now a tool for penance. On the 4th day, Sheriff Durant held a meeting in the town hall. The room was packed. The lawyer, Mr. Simmons, had arrived, looking exhausted but determined. Durant, his face grim, stood at the front. He read the last will and testament of Jacob Whitlow. The room was silent. Hearing the truth in Jacob's own words, he read the clause about the assets, all to Ella and his child, and he read the clause establishing the Eagle's Heart Trust. When he finished, a man from the mining company stood up. This is irregular. The company will contest this." Durant looked at him, his eyes cold. "You will contest it with the United States Marshal. I am opening a full investigation into the company's practices, into the accident that killed Jacob Whitlow, and into the conspiracy led by Edgar Whitlow and Abel Armstrong. which your company funded. The man sat down, his face the color of ash. The town, by its silence, accepted the will. The truth had been made law. Punishment was swift. The mercenaries were held for the circuit judge, their fate sealed. But Durant had a different judgment for the town. The men and women who had signed Armstrong's petition, who had followed his hate, were brought before the sheriff. He did not jail them. He pointed to the splintered door of Ella's cabin, which the miners had brought back. He pointed to the bullet holes in the walls of the town hall. "You followed a madman," Durant said, his voice low. "You let his hate poison you. You will not go to jail. You will rebuild. You will spend the next month repairing every building, every fence, every life you helped to damage. You will work for the community you failed." It was a sentence of public works, a sentence of reformation. As the town began to heal its soul, Ella began to heal her life. She would not stay in the doctor's office. She would not return to the cabin on the cliff. She moved into the main Whitlow house, Edgar's house, Jacob's rightful house. It was a large, cold, empty place, filled with Edgar's expensive, tasteless furniture, but it was hers. The miners helped her. Owen moved her cot. The Comanche, recovering, moved in with her. Wheela took over the kitchen. Singing Bird sat by the fire. Tate, in this large, new, safe world, found a small, dusty child slate in a forgotten room. He brought it to Ella, where she sat by the fire, rocking hope. He held up the slate, and then he pointed at the baby. He made a sound, a puff of air. "H," he tried. Ella's heart ached. She took the chalk and, her hand still sore, wrote the letter H. He watched her, his brow furrowed in concentration. He took the chalk and copied it. Then he pointed to himself. T, she wrote. He copied it. He was not just healing, he was preparing. He was learning to write, so one day he could teach his sister. That evening, Owen Miller stopped by. He found Ella in the front parlor. She was polishing an old brass oil lantern. "That was your father-in-law's," Owen said, his voice soft. "He loved that lamp." "I know," Ella said. She filled it with oil. She lit the wick. The flame was bright and steady. She took it to the front window, the largest window in the house, the one that faced the town and the dark road beyond. She placed it on the table, where its light could be seen from the street. "What is that for?" Ella Owen asked. "It is a guiding light," she said, her voice quiet. "So many people are lost. Edgar was lost. Armstrong was lost. The whole town was lost. I want them to know there is a light on. For anyone, no matter who they are." Owen was silent for a long moment, his old eyes full of tears. "Jacob would have been so proud of you, child." He cleared his throat. The miners and me. We took a vote. We are starting a fund, the Reconciliation Fund. We are all putting in 10% of our pay. It is for Singing Bird's people, to help them rebuild. Not charity, restitution." Ella looked at him, and she smiled, a real smile. Goldridge was changing. The greed that had built it was giving way to something new. Later that night, the house was quiet. The children were asleep. Wheela and the others were in their rooms. Dr. Winters had come and gone, changing Nathan's bandages. Nathan was not in his bed. He was sitting in a large armchair by the parlor fire, his arm in a sling, a heavy quilt over his legs. He had been watching her. Ella finished mending a tear in Tate's small shirt. The silence was not heavy. It was warm, comfortable, filled with the small sounds of the fire and the sleeping house. "Ella," he said. His voice was still weak, but it was clear. She looked up. "The light," he said, nodding toward the lantern in the window. "It is good." "It is for everyone," she said softly. "I know," he said. It brought me back, in the valley. When I was on the line, I saw it. I saw this light. I knew I had to come back to it." She put down her sewing. She rose and sat on the small stool near his chair.
She was close, but she was not touching him. "You are healing well, Nathan," she said. He looked at her, and his eyes, no longer filled with winter, were clear and warm, the color of the good, rich earth. "We are healing." He reached out, his left hand, his good hand. It was scarred, calloused, but it was steady. He did not touch her face, or her hair. He touched her hand, the one that held the needle. He gently took the needle from her and set it aside. Then he just held her hand. His thumb stroked the back of her fingers, a small, gentle motion. "You promised," she whispered. "I remember," he said. He looked at her, his gaze holding hers, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. He saw the mother. He saw the widow. He saw the warrior who had faced down an army. "If I live, I stay," he whispered, repeating his vow. "Stay," she whispered back, her own vow. Together. He leaned forward, a slow, pained movement. She met him halfway. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of fire or of hunger. It was a kiss of promise. It was slow and soft and chaste. It was the taste of survival, of shared breath, of a future that had been bought with blood and sacrifice. It was the first kiss of a new life. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, just as he had done in the cabin. Their hands were still clasped, tight. "Together," he said again. And they sat in the quiet, by the fire, breathing the same air, their new family sleeping soundly around them. The parlor of the big house was no longer cold. The fire in the hearth was steady, and the heavy, opulent furniture Edgar had prized now served a new purpose, softened by the presence of a sleeping child and the quiet industry of a healing family. Ella, Nathan, Tate, and the infant Hope were a unit, a strange and wonderful constellation that the town of Goldridge had begun to accept, not with celebration, but with a quiet, humbled respect. They were a family forged in the crucible of a blizzard, bound by shared loss and a desperate, unbreakable will to survive. The law, in the form of Jacob's last will, had simply made it official. The first act of the new Goldridge, a town attempting to cleanse itself of its own sins, was the formal establishment of the Eagle's Heart Trust. The meeting was not held in the now silent church, which stood like a hollow monument to a false prophet. It was held in the town hall, the floorboards still scarred from the fight. Sheriff Durant sat at the head of the table, his hat placed squarely in front of him. To his right sat Ella, her dignity a tangible presence. She held Hope, who slept against her, a small, warm promise of the future. Beside her, Nathan Red Elk sat tall. His right arm was still bound in a sling, but his presence filled the room. He was no longer a captive or a survivor. He was a steward. On the other side of the table sat Singing Bird, his ancient face a map of wisdom, representing the Comanche survivors. Next to him, his hands clasped firmly on the wood, was Owen Miller, his presence lending the weight of the town's newfound conscience. Mr. Simmons, the lawyer from Santa Fe, read the terms aloud, but the rules were not forged in legal language. They were forged in shared principle. "The will is the law," Sheriff Durant stated, his voice flat. "The trust is established. Now, we define its operation." Nathan spoke first, his voice low but clear, filling the quiet room. "The rule is simple. The valley is sacred. It is not to be broken by machines. The gold is the mountain's blood, and we are not vampires." Singing Bird nodded, his eyes closed. "The mountain gives what it gives. We take only the fallen branches, not the living tree. We take what is on the ground, not what is torn from the heart." Owen Miller, speaking for the miners who had followed him, translated this into a language the town could understand. "We propose a covenant, not a corporation. The trust will permit no mining with dynamite, no hydraulic tearing. Any extraction must be done by hand, by pen and pick, and only in the lower creek beds, away from the sacred valley floor.
Ella added her own condition, and the prophet Jacob wanted this to heal, not to create more greed. A tithe, Owen said, looking at his fellow citizens. 10% of any gold found, minimal as it may be, will go into the reconciliation fund, to rebuild what was broken, for both communities. 10% will go to the town, for the school, for the sheriff. The rest belongs to the trust, to the people of Nathan Red Elk, to be managed as they see fit. It was agreed. The miners, humbled by Jacob's sacrifice and Edgar's treachery, voted for it. The eagle's heart would not make Goldridge rich, but it would make it whole. The winter, which had tried to bury them all, finally broke. The great snows melted, and the water ran in fast. Clean rivers down the canyons, washing away the last of the blood and the ash. The thaw came to the hearts of the people, too. The children were the first to cross the new boundaries. Tate, his voice gaining strength with every day, became the first Comanche child to sit in the new town school. The old one-room building had been scrubbed clean of Armstrong's influence. And a new teacher, a young woman from Santa Fe with bright eyes and a firm belief in books, had come, drawn by the story of a town reinventing itself. Tate, his slate in his lap, learned his letters. He learned to write H for Hope, T for Tate, and E for Ella. In the afternoons, the town children, free from the dark fables of sin, would gather. They did not gather at the saloon. They gathered on the wide porch of the Whitlow house. Wheela, her side now a puckered, silver scar, would be there. Her injury had left her unable to draw a heavy war bow, but she was still a master. She began to teach the children, both Comanche and white, how to fletch arrows, how to read the wind, and Singing Bird, his bones warmed by the spring sun, would tell them the stories. Not the stories of war, but the stories of the land, of the coyote who was too clever, of the hawk who saw too far, and of the sacred duty to listen. Goldridge was building a new life. Ella, now in command of her husband's estate, did not hoard it. She took the keys to the general store, which had been owned by a terrified man who had been one of Armstrong's loudest supporters. She bought him out, his relief palpable. The new sign, painted by Owen himself, did not say Whitlow. It said, Goldridge Mercantile, fair trade, all welcome. She sold her needlework, her skill a marvel. She provisioned the miners, not with crushing debt, but with fair credit, her ledger book open for all to see. Nathan found his own peace, not in fighting, but in building. The ranch had horses, and they had been neglected. His arm healed, the muscles slowly regaining their power. He began to rebuild the stables. He had a quiet, powerful understanding of the animals. He gentled the wild ones, his voice a low, patient murmur. He began to teach, first Tate, then the miners' sons, how to ride. He taught them not with a whip, but with respect. He was teaching them how to be partners with the horses, not masters. And in the big house, a new sound was heard. It happened one evening, when Nathan, his sling finally off, was trying to show Tate how to stack wood. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, and Tate, his serious, ancient face, suddenly cracked. A sound bubbled up from his chest, a rusty, unfamiliar noise, and then it broke free. It was a laugh, a bright, clear, child's laugh. Nathan froze, stunned, and then a slow smile, one of pure, unguarded joy, spread across his own face. That night, and every night, the baby, Hope, slept in her cradle, placed by the great front window, and in that window, Ella kept the brass oil lantern, its wick trimmed, its glass polished, the guiding light. She called it a beacon in the darkness, a promise that this house, this town, was a place of refuge for any who had lost their way. One evening, as the first purple shadows of twilight settled on the porch, Nathan sat with Ella. The air was warm, filled with the scent of new pine and damp earth. He had been working on something for days, his hands busy as his mind was quiet. He held it out to her. It was not a ring. "Your husband's ring," he said, his voice low. "You gave it. It was a great price." "It was the only price," she said, her voice soft. "It bought us this. It bought our family." "It was a circle," he said, "a promise. But it is gone." He opened his hand. This is a new circle, a new promise." It was a cuff of dark, supple leather, taken from the hide of a great buck. He had stitched it with sinew, in a pattern of the mountains, and set in the very center, polished until it shone like a piece of the sky, was the small, blue stone. The stone Tate had pressed into his dying hand in the valley, the child's first prayer. "It is from Tate," he said, "and it is from me. It is not gold. It is not a chain. It is a promise to be free, together." He did not ask. He gently took her left wrist. He slid the leather cuff onto her arm, fastening it with a simple knot. It was warm from his hands. It was not a symbol of ownership. It was a symbol of belonging. Ella looked at it, the deep blue stone against her skin, and she knew she had never owned anything more valuable. The next week, they walked. They did not go to the church. They walked on a bright, clear morning, the air clean from the melted snow. Nathan, Ella, Tate, and Hope, carried in a sling on Nathan's uninjured side. They walked up the high pine hill, the one that stood between the town and the sacred valley. They brought 2 small, simple markers, carved from the wood of the same pine Nathan had used to repair the cabin roof. Nathan stopped near a cluster of tall, ancient trees, their branches whispering in the high wind. He knelt and placed his marker in the earth, facing the rising sun. The carving was simple. "Kaya, mother, warrior, remembered." Ella knelt beside him. She placed her marker in the earth, so close their shoulders touched. Jacob Whitlow, husband, honest man, remembered. The 2 names stood side by side. They were not from the same world, but they had shared the same spirit. They were 2 roots, from 2 pasts, that had nourished the same ground, and from that ground, a new, strong, and deeply intertwined life was growing. They stood there for a long time, the wind in the pines their only hymn, the future of the valley spread out below them. Goldridge had not become perfect, but it had become real. The lust for gold had been replaced by the quiet, steady work of building a home, as Owen Miller had said to Sheriff Durant, watching Ella's light in the window. "Gold is just a thing you find. It is hard, and it is cold. But a home is a thing you build, and it is warm." High above the town, high above the sacred valley of Eagle's Heart, the sun was bright on the last patches of melting snow. A single, great eagle, its wings spread wide, caught a thermal. It rose, circling once over the small town that was learning to heal, and then it turned, flying strong and sure toward the boundless, open sky. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. It is amazing to see how these tales bring us all together. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to our channel, Wild West Tales, and giving us a like. It truly helps. And for an extra way to support us, please hit that hype button. It helps our stories reach more listeners just like you.